What if the stories we were told about World War II left out the darkest parts? Beneath the headlines and heroics, there were missions erased, people silenced, and truths too dangerous to survive the war. These aren't tales found in textbooks, they were buried, classified, or denied entirely. But someone kept records. Someone remembered. And now, we're opening the files they never wanted you to see. In the frozen silence of January 1942, as Allied and Axis forces clashed across continents, the North Atlantic became a theater few dared to enter. Beneath the endless black sky of the Arctic, Convoy FG-17 slipped from the Scottish port of Scapa Flow under orders so classified, only the captains knew their final destination, Murmansk, Soviet Russia. The convoy carried vital cargo, food, ammunition, winter clothing, and most importantly, decrypted German naval codes derived from the Enigma machine. If these codes reached the Soviets, it would strengthen the Eastern Front. If intercepted, the convoy's existence would be erased. Leading the column was HMS Tempest, a British destroyer captained by Elijah Kincaid, a career sailor with a hollowed look in his eyes and frost-bitten hands that still trembled from his last command, a failed rescue operation off Narvik. He was joined by Soviet naval officer Anya Belov, a fluent English speaker and loyal party member sent by Moscow to ensure the shipment's safe arrival. Cold but composed, Anya carried a pistol in her boot and a cyanide capsule in her collar. The convoy, consisting of 9 merchant vessels and 2 escorts, moved in tight formation, steam engines puffing as the aurora flickered above like a silent omen. The sea was dark glass. They passed into the Arctic Circle, radio silent. Unknown to them, German U-boats of Wolfpack Uhl had picked up traces of their signal days earlier. The first strike came on the third night. U-319, hidden beneath an ice floe, launched 2 torpedoes into the side of the SS Darrington, a supply freighter carrying anti-air ammunition. The explosion shattered the night with orange flame and human screams, flinging men into waters that killed in minutes. Kincaid ordered evasive maneuvers, while the surviving ships scattered like startled deer into the snowstorm. The ice and fog became allies and enemies both. Belov, standing on the frozen deck beside Kincaid, whispered, "We are ghosts now." Kincaid only nodded. He was starting to believe it. For the next 5 days, they played a cat-and-mouse game with the wolves beneath the sea. Food froze solid. The men chipped ice from their gun barrels and bunk doors. One by one, ships fell behind or vanished. The Americans aboard SS Iron Wake, led by the stubborn Captain Joe Murphy, refused to break formation even as the storm thickened. On the 6th day, Tempest lost visual contact with Iron Wake. Radio silence held. Tempest was down to 1 working boiler. Fuel was running out. A vote among the officers concluded they must reach Franz Josef Land, a frozen Soviet outpost, to refuel or freeze to death. Then the coded message came from Iron Wake. 1 sentence, barely decipherable: "We are surrounded. They have the codes." That was impossible. The briefcase was supposed to be sealed, guarded by 2 Marines and a timed incendiary charge. Kincaid turned to Belov. Her face was pale. "We cannot let the Germans recover that intelligence. They'll compromise the entire East Front." "Then we have to sink the Iron Wake," she said coldly. "Even if there are men aboard." The idea nearly broke Kincaid, but he understood. Orders were clear. Tempest tracked the Iron Wake by radar. It was drifting north, slowly, as if being towed. They found her half-iced, no movement aboard, no response to signal lamps. The ship loomed like a frozen whale on the sea. Kincaid ordered a boarding party. The 6-man team climbed the hull in silence. Below decks, they found frost-covered corpses, weapons in hand, some with throats slit. In the radio room, a message was scrawled in blood on the wall: "We were betrayed." They found no trace of the briefcase. Suddenly, from below, gunfire. A man in a Kriegsmarine coat fired from the cargo hold, killing a British sailor. The team returned fire. After a brutal close-quarters fight, they subdued the last living German, a U-boat commander named Ernst Kramer, known to British intelligence as the Butcher of Bergen. Under interrogation, Kramer admitted they had intercepted the Iron Wake after decrypting an Allied cipher 2 weeks prior. They ambushed the vessel with magnetic torpedoes and boarded at night under heavy fog. The codes were taken, and Kramer had remained behind with a small team to finish off the crew and scuttle the ship before the Allies arrived. He did not expect Tempest to survive the storm. Belov, furious, demanded to know where the codes were now. Kramer refused. "You will be dead long before they matter," he sneered. Kincaid made the decision. The Iron Wake must be sunk. They set demolition charges in the engine room and left the German to freeze with the ship. As they pulled away, Iron Wake sank slowly, groaning like a dying whale into the black. Tempest limped toward Franz Josef Land, out of fuel and food. The radio mast was half broken. They drifted for 3 days. The cold claimed 7 more crew. Belov developed frostbite on both hands. They burned books and uniforms to stay warm. Then, a Soviet trawler found them. It was a miracle, or a curse. The Soviet crew took them aboard but separated the British survivors. Belov was taken ashore in silence. Kincaid never saw her again. The surviving British sailors were held for a month in a Soviet barracks under heavy guard, interrogated daily. Eventually, Kincaid and the others were released back to Allied hands, but they were told to never speak of Convoy FG-17. In the post-war years, documents regarding Operation Frostlight remained buried in sealed military archives. Kincaid retired in 1947, never promoted again. Belov's fate is unknown. Some say she was executed as a spy. Others believe she was reassigned to the KGB. In 1982, a Norwegian fisherman trawling north of Franz Josef Land pulled up a rusted briefcase from the seafloor, sealed with a British insignia. Inside were papers fused by ice, and a photograph of Belov and Kincaid, standing on the deck of the Tempest, a polar bear in the distance. No other record of Convoy FG-17 officially exists. But the Arctic remembers. Paris, 1943. The Eiffel Tower stood as a silent monument to a France in chains. German banners hung from balconies, and SS boots echoed down cobbled streets. Fear was the language of the city, and trust was as rare as bread. But under this suffocating occupation, in the quiet corners of bookshops and catacombs, an invisible war raged. The whisper cell, *La cellule du murmure*, was born out of silence. It began with a deaf librarian named Elodie Marchand, whose family had fled Alsace when the Germans arrived. By day, she shelved books at the Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève. By night, she coded messages in Braille on the inside spines of returned novels. The Germans never thought to look there. Elodie was not alone. Her closest ally was Jules Bernard, a metro conductor with a wooden leg and a memory like a map. He memorized train schedules, Gestapo patrol times, and blackout gaps. Together, they formed the backbone of the Whisper Cell, a network of resistors with no guns, only words, movements, and silence. By mid-1943, the Whisper Cell had grown to nearly 30 members. Painters, teachers, postal workers, and a one-legged opera singer who broadcast coded messages through old phonographs hidden in antique shops. But their greatest accomplishment came not from sabotage, but from information. Through Elodie's library connections, the cell began intercepting and decoding messages passed between high-ranking SS officers using classified French couriers. With assistance from the British Special Operations Executive, SOE, they began funneling intelligence through a neutral Swedish diplomat named Anders Lundegren. Lundegren had a taste for absinthe and French poetry, and a quiet hatred for fascism. But the Gestapo was not blind. In April, a leak within the resistance, likely from a splinter Gaullist group, led to the arrest of 2 Whisper Cell members. One cracked under torture. Within days, a list of names reached the hands of SS Sturmbannführer Otto Stein, the head of internal security in Paris. Stein was not a brute. He was worse. Cold, intelligent, and fluent in 5 languages, he believed in psychological warfare. He did not arrest members outright. He followed them, waited, fed them disinformation. In time, The whisper cell found itself infected with fear. Meetings stopped. Books went unread. Even Jules withdrew. Elodie was losing hope. Then, a letter arrived. A pigeon-delivered note from London. Agent William Hawthorne inbound. Rendezvous. Montmartre Cemetery. July 3, midnight. William Hawthorne was an SOE legend. Known as the Ghost, he had escaped Nazi capture 4 times, once by faking a fever and being thrown out of a moving train. He arrived disguised as a priest, carrying communion wafers laced with microfilm and a rosary that doubled as a codebook. Hawthorne breathed life back into the cell. He taught them encryption through painting, each brushstroke a Morse dot or dash. He showed them how to wire doors to ring bells when opened and how to hide maps inside ration cards. Together, they devised their boldest plan yet, Operation Chandelier. The objective was to sabotage a high-level Gestapo communication center located beneath a Parisian ballroom once frequented by Josephine Baker. The ballroom had been converted into a secure facility, surrounded by SS guards and rigged with surveillance. But once a month, the Germans held an officers' ball, complete with music, champagne, and vanity. Jules, still employed on the metro, rerouted train schedules to allow smuggled explosives through unused service tunnels. Elodie forged invitation cards based on samples lifted from Stein's secretary. Hawthorne acquired German uniforms and repurposed them to fit their team. On the night of July 22, the Whisper Cell infiltrated the ball disguised as musicians and servers. Elodie wore a black velvet dress, concealing detonators in the false bottom of a violin case. Hawthorne posed as a drunken Oberst, flirting with an SS officer's wife to gain access to the restricted chamber. The ballroom pulsed with laughter and music. But underneath, time ticked. At 11:43 p.m., the charges were set, planted behind a chandelier above the communications room. At 11:57, Hawthorne gave the signal. He dropped his champagne flute and whispered, "Lumière." The chandelier crashed. The room erupted. Fire surged through the lower levels, destroying equipment and scrambling transmissions across half of German-occupied France. In the chaos, Elodie and Hawthorne escaped through the catacombs, aided by Jules and the opera singer, who had rigged a final recording, a phonograph that played La Marseillaise over the burning remains. But there was a price. Stein had seen Elodie. He had memorized her face. Within 48 hours, wanted posters appeared across the city. A bounty of 50,000 Reichsmarks was placed on her head. The Whisper Cell scattered. Elodie refused to run. She stayed in Paris, living among the homeless, moving from church to church, her identity buried beneath dust and silence. Hawthorne returned to London, wounded but alive, and recommended Elodie for the king's commendation. In the winter of 1944, as the Allies advanced toward Paris, Stein was killed by a resistance sniper in a café he had frequented every Thursday. His briefcase contained sketches of Elodie's face, drawn obsessively, hundreds of times. After liberation, Elodie returned to the library. The building had survived. So had she. She never married, never published a memoir, never told her story. But one shelf in the back bore a strange habit, books arranged out of order, as if spelling something in Braille. In 1975, a British journalist researching SOE operations found her. When he asked about the Whisper Cell, she simply smiled and pointed to a copy of Les Miserables. The inside spine read, *, we spoke, even when they could not hear us. *. Squadron, the Pacific Ocean, June 5, 1942. The Battle of Midway raged with thunderous explosions and trails of black smoke across open skies. In this pivotal turning point of the war, the United States Navy struck a crippling blow to the Imperial Japanese Navy. Amidst the organized chaos, one squadron disappeared, without radio, without wreckage, without trace. They were the VFA-14 Hell Widows, a newly commissioned dive bomber squadron assigned to the USS Saratoga. Led by Lieutenant Commander Isaac Harrow, the squadron was made up of 12 SBD Dauntless bombers, many flown by young pilots on their first mission. Harrow, a former literature professor turned aviator, was known for quoting Shakespeare in mission briefings. "Cry havoc, and let slip the dogs of war," he would say, with a tired grin. On the morning of June 5, VFA-14 was dispatched to pursue retreating elements of the Japanese fleet. Their target was an enemy carrier group reportedly fleeing westward. Radio contact was established at 0700 hours. At 0714, Harrow gave the last known transmission, "We see them. Closing in. God help us." Then, silence. No wreckage was ever found. Search planes scoured the area for days. No distress beacons, no parachutes, no oil slicks. 12 aircraft, 36 men, gone. Naval records marked the incident as loss due to combat. But among the flight crews aboard the Saratoga, rumors spread. Some claimed they heard distorted messages hours later. Others swore they saw strange lights in the clouds. The Navy closed the case. But Harrow's younger brother, Thomas Harrow, never accepted the report. A former cryptologist with the Office of Naval Intelligence, Thomas spent the post-war years gathering fragments of evidence. In 1968, he compiled his findings into a private dossier titled Phantom Squadron. According to Thomas, several anomalies stood out. First, a Japanese after-action report declassified in 1957 mentioned ghost bombers that circled a destroyer group for over an hour without attacking. The Japanese described the aircraft as burnt black with glowing markings, a bizarre detail dismissed by Allied analysts. Second, an unmarked recording surfaced in 1947 from a listening post on Midway Atoll. The audio captured a faint signal, "Still flying, engines cold, the sea is wrong," followed by static. The voice matched Isaac Harrow's speech pattern. Third, in 1971, a U.S. oceanographic team surveying the ocean floor northeast of Midway discovered twisted metal remains at extreme depth, far deeper than the planes could have fallen. Among the debris was a rusted identification plate from a Dauntless bomber, serial number matched to VFA-14. But the wreckage was found nearly 400 miles from their last known position. The ocean doesn't carry planes that far. In the documentary that followed Thomas Harrow's investigation, pilots and veterans were interviewed. One, Ensign Joe Rutledge, revealed a memory he'd never shared, that just before takeoff, Harrow seemed disturbed. He said he had a dream the night before, Rutledge recalled, about flying into a storm that wasn't there, hearing music on the radio, violins, and voices speaking in reverse. Harrow, a rational man by all accounts, had scribbled a final note in his logbook before takeoff, *, "The sky isn't ours." The strangest piece came from an islander named Kaleo, who lived on the small, uncharted atoll of Kualu, north of Midway. He claimed that for 3 days in June 1942, strange aircraft circled the island, low and slow, making no sound. "They shimmered in the air," he said, "like fish under water. Not like real planes. Like memories of planes." Skeptics say it was fatigue, stress, oceanic distortion. Others speculate that VFA-14 was shot down far off course, crashed and sank without trace. But a new theory, one Thomas Harrow himself hinted at, emerged from the wreckage records. The positions of the found debris aligned closely with a known magnetic anomaly beneath the sea, a place where compasses spin and radar fails, the Western Pacific Vortex. Naval records show that flight instruments have repeatedly malfunctioned in this zone. Harrow had noted similar issues during training exercises, brief moments of blackout, disorientation, echoes on the radio of their own voices. The conspiracy-minded believe that the squadron passed into a dimensional rift or some natural phenomenon that remains unexplained. One theorist even suggested the squadron became trapped in a temporal loop, still flying, endlessly, caught between signals, between battles. In 1982, a private dive team funded by Thomas Harrow returned to the site where the ID plate was found. They descended into the cold blackness and discovered something chilling. A fuselage, nearly intact, rested upright on the ocean floor. The cockpit canopy was sealed. Inside, a skeleton sat in full flight gear, no helmet, no mask. But carved into the inside of the glass canopy, scratched with a pilot's knife, were the words, "*It was never the enemy." The diver who retrieved the body died 2 weeks later of a sudden brain hemorrhage. His last words, according to his wife, were, They're still flying. Still out there. In the decades since, sightings have continued. Pilots patrolling the Pacific have reported formations of aircraft flying in silence at impossible altitudes. None are confirmed. But in 2003, a Japanese fishing trawler drifting in the region caught a piece of torn, salt-petrified canvas in its net. The stitching matched World War II-era bomber markings. The serial number once belonged to a VFA-14 tail rudder. To this day, the Pentagon refuses to comment on VFA-14. Their sacrifice is listed in the official annals of Midway. But the Navy Flight School in Pensacola, Florida, houses a strange relic, a broken flight clock, stuck at 7:14, the exact moment Harrow's final message was received. Some say if you listen closely at night, you can still hear engines over the waves. The Hell Widows are still searching for home. In the shadowed valleys of the Apennine Mountains, amid snow-covered ridges and broken Roman ruins, a secret war raged beyond the headlines of the Allied invasion of Italy. It was 1944, and while Allied forces pushed north from Salerno and Anzio, the Germans and remaining fascist loyalists gripped northern Italy like a dying hand refusing to let go. But resistance was growing, an unlikely union of enemies bound not by politics, but by necessity. Operation Iron Crescent was never supposed to exist. It was born not from command orders, but from desperation. It began in a monastery-turned-hospital outside Parma, where a wounded Wehrmacht engineer, Captain Ulrich Voller, defected after witnessing SS units execute an entire village for harboring partisans. Saved by an underground network of Catholic nuns, Voller offered information in exchange for sanctuary, blueprints for a terrifying new Nazi weapon. The V-3. A prototype artillery platform buried beneath a mountain near Lake Garda, designed to shell Allied forces in Rome with unprecedented range and velocity. Unlike the V-2 rockets used in London, the V-3 used a series of electrically timed propellant charges along a fixed barrel, capable of firing shells hundreds of kilometers. If completed, it would devastate the Italian campaign. The Allies knew nothing. The Germans assumed secrecy. The only people aware of its construction were a handful of engineers, a Waffen-SS unit, and now, a disgraced German officer with a bullet in his lung. The information reached Giulia Torelli, commander of Brigate Tempesta, a fiercely anti-fascist partisan unit operating in the mountains between Bologna and Verona. She was 27, a former medical student whose family had been executed by Mussolini's black shirts. Her second in command was Don Matteo Savelli, a priest in hiding and former artillery captain in the Royal Italian Army. Together, they formed an alliance of chaos: communists, monarchists, deserters, escaped Yugoslav POWs, disillusioned Germans, and even a few British and American OSS operatives who had parachuted in months earlier and been presumed dead. Their objective: infiltrate, sabotage, and destroy the V-3 installation before it could fire. The plan, codenamed Operation Iron Crescent, had to be executed without direct Allied involvement. If captured, no one could know the West was involved. Over 6 weeks, the resistance gathered intelligence. Don Matteo posed as a traveling confessor and extracted confessions from German engineers under the guise of absolution. Giulia bribed and blackmailed local farmers to smuggle dynamite through wine barrels. Voller translated documents and built mock-ups of the gun's internal mechanisms. Then came the wild card, Agent Daniel Royce, an OSS operative who had vanished during Operation Gin House in Milan. Gaunt, cynical, and chain-smoking Italian cigarettes, Royce returned from the dead with a radio set and orders from London, confirmed the V-3's existence, but under no circumstance revealed direct OSS participation. Royce was not happy to be back. "This mission is suicide with extra paperwork," he muttered. But he saw what Giulia had built, a genuine resistance, something pure in a war full of compromises. The plan was simple in theory: infiltrate the mountain fortress under cover of night. Plant charges in the propellant chamber and shell loading rail. Escape through the lower aqueduct tunnels. Blow the gun and collapse the mountain above it. But nothing in Italy is simple. 2 nights before the attack, their spy in the fortress, a German radio technician named Klaus Becker, was discovered. His mutilated body was dropped in the village square with a note pinned to his chest. Asterisk, this is what traitors smell like. Asterisk, worse still, Royce intercepted a German transmission. SS Gruppenführer Hermann Dietrich, head of Project Sonnenhammer, had arrived to personally oversee the test fire scheduled for April 5. They had 48 hours. On April 4, under freezing rain, the strike team climbed into the hills. Disguised in stolen uniforms, they passed as a munitions convoy. Julia led the team, with Royce posing as a French translator and Voller as the returning engineer. Don Mateo remained behind to coordinate fallback positions and evacuation points through mountain passes. They reached the installation, a steel maw carved into the side of Monte Servo. Inside, the V3 stood like a god's rifle, 100 meters long, surrounded by scaffolding, machinery, and dozens of technicians. Royce and Julia slipped away to plant charges along the main rail. Voller disabled the failsafe and locked the blast doors. But then, the alarm. A young guard had recognized Julia. The firefight erupted instantly. Chaos unfolded across the facility. Royce was shot in the leg. Voller stayed behind to manually ignite the detonation sequence. As Julia and Royce escaped through the aqueduct tunnels, they heard his final words crackle through the stolen radio. Long live the traitors. The mountain roared. A shockwave thundered through the valley. Stones fell like rain. The V3 never fired. German reports blamed an accidental fuel leak. No one was charged. No retaliation followed. The weapon had technically never existed. Julia and Don Mateo were never officially recognized. Royce was quietly exfiltrated to Switzerland, debriefed, and buried in paperwork. After the war, Julia refused medals or office. She returned to her village and rebuilt the school. Don Mateo became Bishop of Parma. In 1963, a tunnel collapse near Lake Garda revealed part of the destroyed V3 barrel. Photographs show a single word scratched into the steel with a bayonet before detonation. Perch. Why? Operation Iron Crescent was never logged in Allied archives. But in the silence of the Apennines, the mountain remembers. Children in the Ashes, Dresden, February 13, 1945. A city of spires and stone, Baroque beauty and porcelain grace. Once called the Florence of the Elbe, its bridges crossed rivers like arms reaching for peace. But that night, fire came from the sky. Allied bombers flew in waves, dropping over 3,900 tons of high explosives and incendiaries. The air caught fire. Streets melted. People became shadows on walls. And yet, amid the inferno, there were survivors. Some were too small to fight, too quiet to notice. Children. They called themselves the Fireflies, a ragged group of orphans who lived in the ruins and lit candles in the dark. They were 8 of them, aged between 6 and 15, led by a fiercely clever girl named Liesel Kruger, 13 years old when the bombs fell. Liesel had once dreamed of becoming an opera singer. Her mother taught music. Her father, a bookseller, was taken by the Gestapo for distributing banned literature. When the firebombing began, she was in a shelter with 20 others. Only 4 emerged. The rest were vaporized when the ceiling collapsed. She crawled from the rubble to find the city changed into a smoking skeleton. Bridges gone. Statues beheaded. A silence so total it rang. In the following hours, she found other children, sifting for food in cellars, hiding from roaming soldiers, or simply staring into fire. There was Jacob, a 10-year-old who hadn't spoken since his school was hit. Marta, 7, with one arm and a pet crow that perched on her shoulder. Emil, 15, who had deserted the Hitler Youth after seeing his friend shot for stealing bread. They formed a family, not by blood, but by embers. They survived on instinct. Scavenged canned food, rainwater collected in bathtubs. Their shelter was the basement of a half-destroyed church, lit by melted wax and broken stained glass. They called themselves the Fireflies because at night, they lit candles in jars and placed them in windows to signal to others that someone was still alive. Then, on the 3rd night after the bombing, they found him. Private Thomas "Tommy" Lewis, an African-American paratrooper from the 101st Airborne, half dead in the ruins of a collapsed building. He had escaped from a POW transport near Leipzig during the bombing chaos and crawled 50 kilometers through forests, dressed in a looted German coat. He was the first black person the children had ever seen. At first, they thought he was a ghost. Jacob even tried to throw holy water on him. But Liesel, unafraid, fed him broth and sewed up his leg wound with piano wire. Tommy couldn't speak German, and the kids knew no English, but they communicated through drawings and gestures. Over the weeks, Tommy became a myth among the children. Strong, silent, kind. He taught them to listen for soldier boots, to trap rats for food, to read the sky for weather. Emil called him Der Ries, the giant. But Dresden was not empty. SS patrols still hunted escapees and deserters. And informers lurked everywhere. One day, while scavenging a cellar, Marta and Jacob were spotted helping Tommy walk. A neighbor, still loyal to the Reich, reported it. The children were betrayed. The SS came at dawn. 2 trucks. Dogs. The children scattered. Marta was caught first, her crow squawking in the sky as she was dragged away. Jacob hid in a sewer for 2 days, living on puddle water. Emil drew the patrol away from the church by setting fire to a fuel barrel near the river, then vanished. Liesel and Tommy escaped through underground tunnels once used for coal transport. For 2 days, they hid in the ruins of the opera house, sleeping among scorched violins and burnt scripts. On the 3rd night, as snow began to fall, Tommy told Liesel, using only gestures, that he would leave to draw the soldiers away, to give her a chance. She refused. He insisted. He walked into the square alone, hands raised, coat open. The SS shot him twice. They hung his body from a ruined lamppost with a sign, *Traitor's dog. That night, Liesel returned. She took down his body with a rope and buried him in the rubble of her father's bookshop. She placed his dog tags in a tin with her mother's sheet music and hid it beneath a floorboard. The war ended weeks later. Dresden fell silent, this time for good. Liesel was found by Red Army medics and sent to an orphanage. She never spoke of Tommy. Years passed. The Fireflies scattered. Emil survived and became a journalist in Hamburg. Marta, rescued from an SS camp, grew up and moved to East Berlin. Jacob died young. From the cold, they think. But Liesel lived. She taught music in Dresden until her death in 2002. She never married. In 1995, a journalist researching the Dresden bombing uncovered a tin box in the ruins of an old bookshop. Inside were dog tags, Lewis, Thomas E., U.S. Army. Alongside it, a page of handwritten notes in German and broken English. He was kind. He was brave. He did not belong here. But we did. And he saved us. On the back of the paper, in Liesel's handwriting, one final phrase. Were waren die Glowwürmchen. We were the Fireflies. Today, in Dresden's Neustadt district, a small memorial stone bears no names. Just an etching of a child holding a candle jar. Beneath it reads, to the lost lights who burned in the dark so others could see. Some stories end when the war does. These didn't. They were buried in rubble, sealed in vaults, or whispered through generations who were warned never to speak. But history doesn't forget. It waits. And now that you've seen what was hidden, ask yourself, how much more still lies in silence, just beneath the ashes?